Due Process, recipient of 6 Mid-Atlantic Emmy Awards.
I committed second-degree robbery, third-degree theft, aggravated assault, and shoplifting.
Delinquent girls. They're being arrested in greater numbers. They're being jailed in greater numbers. But what do those numbers mean? Do they call for some new action? Girls in greater trouble with the law on this edition of Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process is made possible by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law. Additional funding is provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual.
More of them are being busted, more of them are going to jail. The face of juvenile justice is changing, or at least the gender. I'm Raymond Brown, and on this edition of Due Process, the apparent increase in delinquency among girls. Is it their behavior that's different? Or is it the system's response that's changed? We'll talk cause and cure with a psychologist, an academic, and the former state chief of juvenile justice. But first, here's Sandy King with how one fledgling state program is taking on the problem.
Raymond, it is a national problem with some alarming statistics. Between 1981 and 1997, the rate of violent crime for girls rose by more than 100%, with the increase in arrest for girls greater than for boys on almost every crime. Here in New Jersey, where girls once were 20% of kids arrested, now they're 25%. And according to national studies, juvenile justice programs just for girls aren't up to the job. But DOVES, an acronym for Developing Opportunities and Values Through Education and Substance Abuse Treatment, is a big name for a small program that may be the start of something different.
I committed second-degree robbery, third-degree theft, aggravated assault, and shoplifting.
She's also had problems with drugs.
Yeah, I used every day.
And family.
My grandparents, my parents are recovering addicts. Basically about everybody in my family used at one point in time, like my aunts or uncles, cousins.
And those are just a few of the ways that Natasha fits the profile of girls in trouble.
I got to see my mom.
I know, I seen her.
You saw her?
Yeah.
She's like, how's everybody? Since Saturday, has anything changed? I was like, no.
Girls who get locked up.
We're finding girls with deep emotional problems. Let me tell you what the girls look like that come to me right here. You will find a girl many, many times from a single-parent family raised by a mother. You will find that there is a huge amount of sexual abuse. Many, high percent of our girls have been sexually abused by a mother's boyfriend, a grandfather, an uncle, somebody close to the family. That is just a staggering blow to a young woman.
I don't know where my mother is, but my father died when I was incarcerated in 1998.
And now Latifah is back in again, but in a different kind of institution.
Listen.
So hard.
I'm not even there.
The food may not get better reviews than the standard juvenile lockup, but there are some differences here at Dove's, from the size
Our population service is 10 girls.
to the view from the outside
Is this a bath?
and the program inside.
I didn't even know you could do that now.
I just asked today.
I found out.
I didn't know either.
Now we all know.
New Freedom is a cognitive behavioral approach to treatment. With Doves, it has a a substance abuse piece built into it, and it also has the gender-specific piece. They deal with women's issues.
Peer pressure, relationships with boys. For myself, it was abandonment issues, the stress, the emotions, the feelings.
I think it has a lot to do with the using drugs and alcohol. That plays a main part in it, and just maybe falling into acceptance of peers, of their boyfriends.
They are the kinds of issues cited as too often unaddressed in a major report issued by the American Bar and National Bar Associations last year. A report that revealed some shocking statistics, starting with a sharp increase in the number of girls arrested and jailed, up 83% from 1988 to 97.
I was caught with a bundle of heroin and with 10 bags of heroin. I stole a ring. I pawned it.
Then there's the fact that as many as 90% have been sexually or physically abused, with girls far more likely to be arrested for running away, jailed for a less serious offense, sent back to detention after release.
I went to detention center first, and then I went to the shelter. Then I went to a program, detention, shelter, home. It's like I bounced back and forth.
And there is another important gender difference.
I would say off the top of my head, it would probably be like 75% of our girls are incarcerated because of the relationships they have with their male counterparts.
Maybe on medication, maybe on drugs, with a history of all kinds of problems. She couldn't get along at home, she couldn't get along at school, she couldn't get along in the neighborhood, and now, for pity's sakes, we expect her to get along in the juvenile detention center, or we expect her to survive in a correctional center. Doesn't work. And often they explode.
It was like a rush. It was fun to know that I could steal something and get away with it.
I relapsed. I went back to drugs, and I was on probation. So I went to a program, but I left there. So then I got locked up, for leaving the program. So I was in detention. Then they found the Doves program for me.
They were proud of me. They're like, you did so much better this time than last time. You have more positive attitude. Yeah, now I'm going to tell you.
Why did you flip out?
Because I wasn't ready to work the program yet.
They need support. They need people on the outside that are willing to go the extra mile for them, give them that ride to work, or help them with educational programs, or help them with funding for educational programs.
EFG and HFJ are vertical angles, and therefore equal. EFG equals 130
so
degrees.
The bottom would be same as the top?
Yes, they're equal to each other.
It is long past the time that the only thing a girl should learn to do in a program is to fix hair and color nails. New Jersey has moved in the direction of trying to be more sensitive to gender-specific programming that uniquely meets the needs of girls. We have so far to go in that area.
And whether they are among the few who make it into Doves or the many in traditional state and county lockups, delinquent girls do fit a profile that sets them apart from the boys who get busted. More of the girls are abused at an early age. More try or at least think about suicide. More of them have parents who've been jailed. And some experts seem to think with the right intervention, maybe more of them can be turned around.
But just what is the right intervention? What's the source of this serious growing problem? And are there solutions that seem to make sense? Just a few of the questions we'll put to the experts when we come back. So stay with us.
Perhaps because of the way the gender situation has changed in society, that it puts women in a more aggressive role, perhaps.
I think parents are so concerned with their boys that sometimes they forget that anyone can get into that kind of lifestyle.
Maybe they're looking for attention. Maybe they're looking for attention from, I guess, adults, and they're not getting it at home.
Maybe the family structure has broken down. Maybe we're not as nurturing as we should be.
Girls, they take after their parents more than the guys. And I think less responsible parents, less responsible the girls are.
It's a loss of family control more than anything else. I have children of my own. I keep them under tight rein, but you never know when they're out of my sight.
Young girls in crime, a juvenile justice system that's increasingly female. The reasons why and what needs to come next. Just two of the questions we'll put to the experts. Dr. Cynthia Northington, a developmental psychologist from William Patterson University. Dr. Bruce Stout, the director of UMDNJ's Violence Institute and the former director of New Jersey's Juvenile Justice Commission. And with us from Newark, Seton Hall law professor Philip Ross, who is also the director of trial practice for the Public Defender's Juvenile Justice Unit. Thank you all. There's no aspect of public policy statistics that I trust less than statistics related to crime. So the question I would ask you, Dr. Northington, is whether the statistics we're seeing in terms of female juvenile incarceration are reflective of a real increase in juvenile crime among women.
They appear to be. What we're seeing is that the risky behavior is reflective of a lot of the behaviors that are encouraged in society by the media, by the video games that they play, by the television shows that they watch, and we're seeing parallels in the behavior between the girls and the instances of juvenile crime.
Okay, so you jumped into the why question even before I can ask it. So are you saying that it's the same influences that are affecting juvenile crime among males that are causing an increase among juvenile crime with women? Why is that?
We have always looked at boys and those influences, and now we're looking at girls because the same kinds of stimulation that has traditionally been marketed to boys is now being marketed to girls, where girls are walking around with their underwear showing, they're in videos doing violent acts.
But let me bring you back to Mary Previty, for example, who said in the report we showed that there was a high instance of abuse, sexual abuse towards young women that seemed to correlate with incarceration. Are you saying that there are significant differences among boys and girls in terms of cause, or are you saying that we're now just starting to look at and see the results of the same causes that affect boys affecting girls?
I would say that the instances of sexual abuse has always been a factor. It's the behaviors, the affect now that is causing alarm. Girls have always been sexually abused by the mother's boyfriend, stepfathers, uncles, etc. That has been a factor for years. Having taught in a school for delinquent teenagers for a few years, we would see that all the time. But now we're seeing that the girls are reacting to it in a way that we're not prepared for. And, oh, sorry.
Okay. No, I was just going to say, I'm still not clear whether your view is that it's the same things that affect boys that are now just affecting girls more profoundly, or they're different. You think it's pretty much the same?
Yes.
Okay. Now, then that leads me to ask you, Dr. Stout, in terms of your long hands-on experience with the system, is the system now, and has it historically viewed boys as different from girls in terms of what we do with them once they're incarcerated, or do you think there is kind of a unitary approach that's necessary?
I think we're just beginning to learn that we need to handle girls differently. They have a different developmental process. They tend to identify themselves with their relationships with adults and peers. I think we're beginning to understand that the kinds of delinquency interventions that were developed primarily with boys that focused on developing positive peer cultures are inappropriate for girls. We have to work on getting them to develop a moral sense of self that isn't dependent on their relationships with others.
But I could argue, and I suspect you might even agree, that if we took a large number of juvenile males who were in the system, you would say, look, developing a moral center along with some good academic skills might make a big difference. So what is it that then distinguishes girls from boys?
Well, one thing that's certainly unique to girls as a group, to generalize, is that they tend to enter the juvenile justice system with an array of problems that boys don't come with. Sexual abuse is by far the most common.
Any others that you can think of that are unique to girls?
Certainly very disruptive and I would call them dysfunctional relationships with family members. lots of mental health issues, including serious psychopathologies.
What about what we heard about dysfunctional family units? Does that tend to be more true of girls who get into the system than boys?
Absolutely. It is not uncommon for every girl in the deep end of the system to be a victim of sexual abuse, often, and in many cases, almost always, by a family member, an adult caregiver, like an uncle or a father or a cousin, or another family member.
Professor Russ, let me go back to what is called sometimes in juvenile justice parlance, the front end. That is, in terms of how the legal system is addressing these issues. If there are differences in the kinds of influences on girls that are coming into the system, are they treated differently in terms of the juvenile justice process?
Well, I think they're treated differently because of the fact that there are less community resources available for the young girls. Girls, in my experience in 25 years of dealing with the system, most of their offenses are aggressive, assaultive type behavior. One comment was made previously about their relationship with boys, and I find that a lot of the offenses take place because of this interaction with a boy. For instance, a girl might go to school and another girl might have a crush on her boyfriend, and the initial girl reacts in a very negative way by maybe pulling a knife on her, something like that. So that's part of the major problem.
Do you feel, based on your experience, that the justice system itself should view that differently than, say, a boy who might participate in a robbery using the same knife?
Well, I don't know if they should look at it differently. A lot of the offenses that girls get involved in are not stranger-to-stranger offenses, if that's what you're alluding to. I wish they had more avenues, things like counseling, residential programs available for girls. So I think the problem with the system, they either give girls probation or send them away. There's really nothing in the middle to deal with their problems.
Dr. Northington, I think I read that most of the assaults by women tend to be on other family members when they're at this age, yes. Which sort of dovetails with what Professor Ross is saying. If that's so, should the very initial contact between juvenile females and juvenile males be different because of a difference we see in the ways in which they violate the law?
Definitely. The focus of it should be different. It was mentioned earlier by Dr. Stout, I believe, that the sense of self needs to be addressed by the justice system, where we had counseling, where there were counselors who actually talked about, as we saw in the Doves program, talked about why they were doing the behaviors, what they were thinking about, their sense of attachment, things like that.
Let me play devil's advocate and suggest that there are probably an awful lot of girls and boys who have struggles with their sense of self, and among girls who don't wind up in the juvenile justice system or perhaps don't commit crime. I mean, it's hard for me to see how that's an easy identifier for a child that's going to have a problem.
But from birth on, boys are socialized not to deal with those issues emotionally. So society encourages boys to either hide their emotions, deal with them alone or by themselves. Girls are encouraged by society to be expressive and to be emotive and to deal more in the open with their emotions, and therefore you see a lot more of the for better or for worse, you see a lot of the emotional-based behaviors being acted out now.
Now that would suggest that maybe programs like Doves that are smaller and that deal with girls in a more intimate setting might have a better chance for success. Is there anything we know now, statistically, that suggests that kids who come out of a program like Doves are going to do better than those in the general female juvenile population? Well,
there's definitely a good, solid research base that indicates that smaller community-based programs are more effective in producing long-term behavioral change than large institutions.
Well, then why isn't there a cottage industry then of programs like this for young women at a time when we're seeing this almost astronomical increase in their involvement in the system?
Funding. Pure and simple funding. Particularly in these difficult fiscal times, it's very, very difficult to get a program like that going. In fact, the Doves program is federally funded, and absent a federal grant that allows New Jersey to operate that program, there would be no unique female substance abuse treatment program.
But is it much more expensive to run a Doves kind of program per young person than it is to just put them in the general juvenile population?
Well, I would argue that the question should be different. Why do we rely on the juvenile justice system to deal with things like addiction and mental health problems that I think arguably should be dealt with in the mental health system or in the public health system?
Well, but it seems to me that you've broadened the question considerably. The reason we're dealing with this population is because they've been apprehended in another crime or a drug-related crime, and society has no choice. It can ignore effectively kids who have drug problems who don't become an obvious menace to themselves or others.
But the girls who have serious addictions, whose behavior has gotten so out of control that they've engaged in serious delinquency, didn't start in serious delinquency. They had addictions and they had behavioral problems.
What aspect of what institution in society or what part of society should be doing this? Because it sounds like you're talking about something that's really outside of the criminal justice system.
Well, for instance, in New Jersey, generally, fewer than 10% of the addicts that we have in the state have treatment available to them. That's a general public policy issue in New Jersey.
So you're saying that there's but what would be the source of, given a society that is fighting tooth and nail over health care, for example, where would you find the resources and in what institution would you put it to say, let's catch all the young girls who may be having drug or alcohol problems without regard to whether they've committed a crime? Where would you find the money and where would you put the money?
Our State Department of Health has a whole array of community-based substance abuse residential treatment facilities that are publicly funded for those without the ability to pay. We don't look to, because of the gap between the need for treatment and the availability of treatment is so disparate, we don't have access to treatment for most addicts in New Jersey. It would be wonderful to increase that availability so that when a young girl becomes addicted, we can get her into treatment before her behavior is so serious she's hitting you or I over the head or robbing our car.
I don't mean to give short shrift to the argument, but it sounds like it's a broader argument that we've been having for a long time about drug policy. Professor Ross, let me get you back to girls. Would there be, or do you see now, a different treatment for girls who get caught up in the system and that they suffer more from a lack of resources than boys of comparable age?
I totally agree with that assessment. I look at the situation with girls very similarly to a situation involving young boys who are involved with sexual assault offenses and arson offenses. There are basically little or no programs available for those kind of offenders, and I look at the girl situation in the same light. There should be a lot more community resources available, programs available for young girls to attend.
Let me also address behavior as well as resources, and then Professor Ross first and then anybody else. To some extent, is there evidence that girls are sometimes prosecuted for offenses that might be overlooked with boys at the lower end of the spectrum?
Yeah, I think that is correct. It's an unfortunate situation, and a lot of the problem, girls sometimes come to the forefront in terms of media coverage because there are fewer girls involved in the system than boys. We talked about the increase in female crime as juveniles, and that's correct, but still, I looked at a recent statistic. At the Essex County Youth House, there were 220 boys and only 20 girls. So that shows that there are a lot more boys involved in offenses than girls. But that 20 figure would have been 8 or 10, maybe 10 years ago. So there's certainly an abundance.
Why are we more judgmental about young girls? And is it a good thing because we're reaching out, or is it just a harsh application of a double standard?
As a society, we have preconceived ideas about the behavior that girls should exhibit. We attribute certain behaviors and certain patterns of speaking and communicating with girls. We do not expect girls to behave violently and to take on the characteristics of boys. Boys will be boys. We look at hyperactivity and we say that's a boy problem. We look at boys committing petty theft and shoplifting, etc. Now, yeah, that's a boy problem. Girls, all right, we're surprised when we see that kind of behavior.
There is what I would call a reverse sexism in New Jersey's juvenile justice system. Girls are not incarcerated at a rate commensurate with their involvement in serious crime. And I think it reflects back on something Professor Ross said earlier. You've got probation and you've got the deep end of the system, removing a girl from a home and locking her up. Judges, I think, recognizing that there is a dearth of good treatment service available for girls, give girls second chances before they lock them up, where with a boy they wouldn't. Now, I don't think anybody wants to challenge that reverse sexism, but the sad reality is they don't get the kinds of treatment services they need until their behavior is so egregious that they are removed from their home.
So it seems as though there is disparate treatment at almost every level and in almost every aspect of approach, whether in some instances we're more harsh or sometimes, in your view, too lenient. Let me come back.
No, I didn't argue that we're too lenient.
Well, but Ross said there are times when girls get prosecuted for things that boys would not be.
But not incarcerated. I don't know if Professor Ross...
Well, it looks like we're not going to resolve this issue today. Thank you for being with us, because that's it for this edition of Due Process. We'll be back here again, however, next week. Until then, for Sandy King and all of us here at Due Process, I'm Raymond Brown. Thanks for watching.
Emotionally troubled girl, maybe on medication, maybe on drugs, with a history of all kinds of problems. She couldn't get along at home, she couldn't get along at school, she couldn't get along in the neighborhood, and now, for pity's sakes, we expect her to get along in the juvenile detention center, or we expect her to survive in a correctional center. It doesn't work. And often they explode. I will tell you that a girl with severe mental health problems is one of the most difficult human beings to deal with in any place, but certainly in a lockup. We're not serving our girls very well.
Major funding for Due Process was made possible by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law. Additional funding was provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual,